they look at me when we're ready, and I'm like, yeah, let's go. Is that cool, Lieutenant? I'll grab something.
I'm sorry.
Written letter?
Do you want me to sign it?
Well, I might need to put
Might have to run that.
Sheriff Dalton.
Sure.
You're violating this code and that code. You ready? Always ready, David.
All right, let's call to order the regular meeting of the Community-Oriented Policing Committee, the COMPOC, for Monday, October 9th, 2023. This is David Shorey, who is not John Mento nor Marlene Best, but they've asked me to chair for this meeting. So call to order and ask for the roll call, please.
All right, Captain Mike McNeil.
Here.
Lieutenant Galvey.
Here.
Jacob Donnan.
Here.
Mike Olander.
Here.
Kristen Dare.
Here.
Janessa
Nedney. Here.
Nedney, thank you. David Shorey.
Here.
Bonnie Baranoff. Linda Roach.
Here.
Dr. Foreman.
Here.
Steve Stellman.
Here.
Danette McLaughlin.
Here.
Mike Aiken.
Here.
And I am here. Ann Morrison. And Margie Dice is here. So you have quorum.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes for the September 11th, 2023 meeting. Take a moment, and if someone would like to put forth a motion, I'll go ahead and take that up.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Moved by Steve Stillman. Is there a
I
second?
second.
Seconded by Linda Roach. We'll call the roll.
Santee Sheriff's Department.
Aye.
Mike Olander.
Aye.
Kristen Dare.
Aye.
Janessa McNeely. Nedney. Sorry, I'm going
Aye.
to get it right. David Shorey.
Aye.
Bonnie Baranoff.
Aye.
Linda Roach.
Aye.
Dr. Foreman.
Aye.
Steve Stellman.
Aye.
Danette McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mike Aiken.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Awesome. We'll move on to item number 3, which is the update on neighborhood watch and crime prevention events and the holiday safety. Jacob?
Good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to highlight a couple bullet points here for steps we're going to be taking to increase our presence and patrol activity during the holiday season. We will be increasing our number of extra patrols in both residential neighborhoods and business plazas, some of our big box stores. We will be adding additional foot patrols to Trolley Square to keep an eye on the trolley. We're going to try and see if we can use our county sky tower, which is the observation post, which is on a scissor lift. You may have seen them in parking lots in the past. Just another eye in the sky there. We'll try and bring on 1 to 2 extra deputies each patrol shift, just so we have extra bodies out there. We'll also be utilizing our signboard in high traffic areas or plaza parking lots to emphasize to the community need to be locking their vehicles, not leaving any valuables inside. And we'll keep posting that information also on our social media. Obviously, we don't want to leave presence in plain view inside vehicles. I know it's a busy time for holiday shopping, so we want to reduce that crime of opportunity as much as possible. And our cops team is also going to be performing extra patrols, both in residential areas and the Trolley Square. One notable arrest I wanted to mention, our automotive theft detective, Detective Chandler, he's been working really hard late at night to try and deter catalytic converter theft. And we were able to make an awesome arrest last week. We arrested 4 individuals, and they were in possession of 6 catalytic converters in the trunk. So we're very happy about that. And then one last thing I wanted to mention, we have been seeing an uptick in vehicle thefts, particularly particularly that of 90s Jeep Cherokees and Jeep Wranglers. So if you own one of those vehicles, please make sure you're taking extra precautions to lock it up, park in a garage if you can, and just keep it locked up.
Interesting. Any questions?
Yeah, I got a follow-up. Great news on the catalytic converter. Were they local suspects or were they out-of-towners?
They were out of town.
That's great news.
In the publicity for the holiday, are you also able to put some of that up on Santee TV? Is there some crossover?
Sure, I can send some stuff.
Flexi mugshots.
I can,
That's what they do in a lot of parts of the country.
I can see what information I can pass along.
Okay, awesome. All right. No other questions? All right. Well, we'll move on to item number 4, which is our presentation. I'd like to introduce James Fontaine, who is the Division Chief for Major Narcotics Division at the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, who will be talking about xylazine, an emerging threat in San Diego County.
Thank you, Mr. Shorey, and good afternoon, committee members. As Mr. Shorey said, I'm here to talk to you about xylazine, but I want to start just a little bit about who I am and what we're seeing in the county as it relates to some other drugs closely related with xylazine. And so I am the division chief of the Major Narcotics Division. I've got a team of 14 prosecutors spread throughout the county. I have 2 out here in East County. And what we focus on primarily is the investigation and prosecution of high-level drug traffickers. But over the last several years, our fentanyl has taken center stage for us, and for good reason. Last year, we lost 814 people in San Diego County to fentanyl. The year before that was right around the same, 814 people. But what we're seeing and what we're tracking are emerging drug threats related to fentanyl. And there are some novel, potent opioids that are coming on the scene. Nitazene is another drug. There's a series of nitazines that are even more powerful than fentanyl that are making their way throughout the country. And then there's something like xylazine that I'm going to talk about today. Xylazine is not an opioid, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But what I'd like to do is start with a very short video, because I think it's important that you see what fentanyl plus xylazine actually looks like. And I'm confident in saying that what you're seeing is fentanyl plus xylazine because the video was taken earlier this summer in a neighborhood known as Kensington in Philadelphia, which just about everyone recognizes as the epicenter for xylazine in the United States. And it is devastating that community. There was a recent lab study that found that of all the fentanyl seized and examined, 90% of it contained xylazine. And I'll get into why that's so incredibly troubling for us and how we're tracking the spread of xylazine from the Northeast to the South, to the West, and the rest of the country. For people that are watching and people that are going to see this later, that it does show some scenes of drug use. It shows some scenes of people clearly under the influence of controlled substances. So some people might find that hard to watch. They might have. So if you want to look away for the next couple minutes, it'll be pretty obvious when I move on to the next subject. But here's the video.
Just different.
So there's a lot of people suffering in that video, a lot of pain, addiction, and just lives ruined. And they're worthy and in need of compassion, and they're in need of treatment. And experts estimate that maybe 15%, 15% of the people that have substance use disorders actually end up going forward and getting treatment that can help them. So, and there's a lot that can be said and a lot that can be done about why that number is so low, so much more than what we can discuss in my time with you this afternoon. But it's important that we realize that when xylazine comes into the mix, first of all, opioid use disorder, which what fentanyl would fall under, is one of, if not the most incredibly powerful and most challenging use disorder to overcome. Now that xylazine has been added to the mixture, it makes it that much more difficult, and that'll make sense in just a moment when I talk a little bit more about xylazine. And we need to get in front of it. It's not enough that we prosecute these cases, investigate them. We need to try and prevent more, and we need to reduce the supply of the drugs coming into our community. But I thought it was important that you see that video, and there's many more. If you search online, you're going to see things much more graphic. And every time I watch that video, I see something new. In fact, just now, I saw towards the very end a guy wrapping his hands, maybe you noticed it, in large bandages. And this next photo that I'm showing you is actually from an earlier publication, from New York Times article that discussed xylazine and the effects it was having in the Northeast. And this lady has her arm resting on a table. And what you can see there is, well, in no other terms, it's a very disturbing image of her right forearm. And you can see the wounds on her right forearm. And there she's trying to get medical care to try and save that arm. What xylazine, one of the effects xylazine has is it's a vasoconstrictor. What that means is it's actually constricting and lessening the flow of blood that goes through our bodies. So the surface areas of your skin, they're going to lose blood flow first. It can die. Infections can spread. And then it goes through the muscle, goes all the way down to the bone. And in the most serious cases, it requires amputation. And if you look closer at that photo, you'll notice her right leg is missing below the knee. That's from xylazine, chronic xylazine use. And what we've seen is people will be injecting or consuming fentanyl. They might inject in their arm, and the necrotic tissue, the dying tissue, might occur in their legs. It doesn't coincide necessarily with the injection point. People who are smoking the drug might also develop these wounds. That's also incredibly concerning and troubling for us dealing with xylazine coming across the country. So you may have heard of it. Xylazine is also known as tranq. You may have heard of it called tranq dope, zombie drug, Philly dope. Has a number of names out on the street for the illicit xylazine. And it's most often, almost always, mixed with fentanyl. But it's been found with other drugs as well. It's in cocaine, it's in heroin, and some other drugs. Xylazine is a central nervous system depressant, just like fentanyl is. That means it's going to slow your heart rate, it's going to slow your breathing, it's going to lower your blood pressure, and also incredibly concerning is that there's no overdose reversal drug on the market for xylazine. Fentanyl and all opioids, they can be reversed. If there's a person suffering from an overdose from fentanyl, you give them naloxone. And naloxone is the best chance. There's no guarantee that it's going to reverse the fentanyl overdose, but it's the best tool we have, and that's what we have. Narcan is the common brand name that you might have heard of it called, but that's the drug naloxone. There's no similar drug right now for xylazine. So xylazine is lowering your blood pressure, slowing your breathing, can send you into a coma. Xylazine alone can kill you. But xylazine now mixed with fentanyl complicates everything. The recommendation is always, if you're encountering someone that you believe is suffering from a fentanyl overdose, and maybe there's xylazine on board, still administer naloxone, because that'll at least address the naloxone, the opioid, the fentanyl. And then the hope is we can restore breathing, get them medical aid for the xylazine that are still going to be active and have zero effect from the Narcan. There are efforts underway to develop an antidote. Of course, I'll talk about the veterinary supply and how xylazine is used in veterinary medicine. They do have reversal agents, but it's never been formulated for use in humans. So we don't know how to use it. We don't know the right dosage. So that's science and experts are working on developing that. Another thing that complicates the overdose, the opioid use disorders that we're trying to overcome and address is the fact that the withdrawal symptoms from xylazine can be very severe. And so we have people that have, one, you have no reversal medication. Let's say you're lucky enough to get into treatment. It's almost always accompanied by an opioid use disorder. So you're suffering from fentanyl. That means fentanyl nowadays. Heroin is almost gone from the scene. Drug cartels are not making heroin anywhere near the rates that they used to. And I can go into that if you have questions. But now it's fentanyl. With fentanyl and any opioid, you have drugs that will help you manage withdrawals and help you get through your treatment so that you can become sober and break your dependence upon the drug. Buprenorphine is one of them, Suboxone, naltrexone, morphine. So there's a bunch of other, not morphine, methadone. There's a bunch of other drugs that are there for opioid use disorders, but there's nothing like that for xylazine. And xylazine comes with this severe anxiety when you stop using it. Once you become dependent, you get to severe anxiety, and that now can derail anyone that's actually getting treatment for their opioid use disorder and send them right back into using and right back into, and they'll, even with buprenorphine on board or naltrexone on board that would have been successful, the xylazine lessens the chances that they're going to be successful in treatment. So we need to keep track of that and get ahead of it, like I said. So a little background on xylazine. What is it? It was developed in 1962 as an antihypertensive medication. So people with high blood pressure. They found out in the clinical human studies, it's way too effective. It lowered the blood pressure so much, slowed the breathing so much, it was never approved for use in humans. Xylazine has never been approved for use in people. And about 10 years later, 1972, it does get FDA approval for use in animals. It is incredibly useful in veterinary medicine. It's used every single day. You've probably heard people call it a horse tranquilizer. That it is, but it's so much more than that. It's used on horses. If you had a dog or a cat neutered or spayed, chances are pretty high that they probably had xylazine administered to them, maybe with ketamine as an anesthetic. Cattle, for some reason, the only sedative or relaxant that works for them is xylazine. So across the spectrum of many animals, it's used on a daily basis by our veterinarians, and it's hugely important and very beneficial. But it's not a controlled substance at all. And I want to talk about that in just a bit. But earlier this year, the DEA did put out a public safety alert, and in that alert, it indicated that 48 out of 50 states have now detected xylazine in the illicit drug supply, the illegal drug supply. And 23% of the fentanyl and 7% of the pills, counterfeit pills that had fentanyl, also had xylazine on board. The public safety alert included what I already discussed about no reversal medication and that the wounds might lead to amputation. There is pending federal legislation. It's this House of Representatives Bill 1839, Senate Bill 993. And so the federal government is seeking to designate xylazine as a Schedule III controlled substance. And so that's going to penalize use, distribution, importation of the drug. while allowing it to still be used by veterinarians in veterinary medicine. If and when that law passes, there's bipartisan support for it. Looks like it's likely to pass. When it eventually passes, there's going to be a follow-up within a year of passage that's going to require information to get brought back. The Attorney General of the United States is going to have to report through the DEA and the FDA what is the prevalence of use. How prevalent is xylazine throughout the country, and where is that drug coming from? Because there's now a discussion of how much of it is actually coming from the legitimate veterinary supply and being diverted from that supply and then used in the illicit market versus how much is coming from the illicit supply, meaning it's coming from usually China, countries outside the United States, sending it directly into the United States or sending it into Mexico, where it's then making it across the border north into the United States. And so they're going to try and answer those questions and whether or not it should stay a Schedule III controlled substance. I want to talk to you a little bit about scheduling. I think that'll maybe give you a better idea of why that matters and what it means. But it's really, when you think of controlled substances, they're broken down. There's two primary questions. One, the first question is there any accepted medical use for the drug? That's the first question. And then the second question is, what's the risk of abuse and dependence? Schedule I drugs, those are the most dangerous drugs. Schedule I, there's no accepted medical use. End of discussion. So you might think of drugs like heroin, crack cocaine, those are Schedule I drugs. No medical use. Then we get to Schedules 2, 3, 4, and 5. All of those have some form of accepted medical use. And then the question just becomes, what's the risk of abuse and dependence? Schedule 2 has the highest risk of abuse and dependence, and then that risk gets lower as you go down to Schedule 3, Schedule 4, and Schedule 5. Schedule 2 drugs are like your methamphetamine. Fentanyl is a Schedule 2 drug. There's a lot, cocaine, Schedule 2 drug. Schedule 3 drugs, less risk of abuse and dependence. And that's what we're at least being proposed right now federally in terms of scheduling for the xylazine. Back in April of 2013, Dr. Rahul Gupta, he's the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy out of the White House. He designated xylazine mixed with fentanyl as an emerging threat to the United States. And he looked at stats and data that he received from the DEA regional laboratories. And they looked at 2020 and 2021 and how much of xylazine is out there in the community across the country. And what they found was that in all 4 U.S. Census regions, meaning Northeast, the South, the Midwest, the West, that what they found was that there was an increase in those years of xylazine being detected in all the seizures. The biggest rate of increase was in the South, followed by the West. He also looked at, the DEA found, the increases in the number of deaths where xylazine was in fact detected in the postmortem toxicology. And what he found was the greatest increase where xylazine was detected in the postmortem toxicology was, again, in the South, followed by the West. So that's concerning. It's coming our way, and it's already here. Xylazine is in San Diego County, and I'll talk about that. So after that designation, the federal designation as an emerging threat to the country, there was a national response plan that was formed. And I've listed it's pretty much a roadmap of where do we go from here. We've identified the issue and where are we going to focus as a country in addressing this problem. And it talks about all these things I've listed: testing, data collection, education, best practices. And should it stay a Schedule III or should it be a different schedule? And overall, it listed a goal of reducing fentanyl, the xylazine-positive deaths by 15% by 2025. I put at the bottom a citation for where, if you want to read that entire national response plan, you can find it, and it goes in great detail about these next steps that are going to be taken federally. Of course, there are a number of states that decided they're not going to wait for the federal government to act. And what I'm showing you now is a map of the United States with the 12 states that have either passed or pending legislation to declare xylazine a controlled substance. And you can see that the scheduling it covers it's all over the board. Florida and Illinois, for example, has decided that they're going to declare xylazine a Schedule I controlled substance. And then you can see it goes on from there. The majority do so far out of the 12 states are choosing to label it a Schedule III controlled substance. On the map, you'll see there's one green state, that's Delaware. The green is just because that one is an emergency order as opposed to legislation that's pending. They passed an emergency order that for 120 days they were controlling it, and it was illegal to use and supply it illicitly, and they just renewed it. So it'll be on that emergency order for another 60 days. They're evaluating whether or not to, in fact, introduce legislation. All the rest of the states that you'll see there in purple, those are already laws in place. And in orange, those are the states that have pending legislation regarding xylazine. Now looking closer to home in San Diego County, it's relatively rare here, but like I said, we find it incredibly important to keep track of these trends. As you can see, in 2019, we had only one death where xylazine was detected in the postmortem toxicology, then nothing in 2020 and 2021. In 2022, it was the end of 2022, November and December, we had 2 deaths, 1 in each month. And then in 2023, we've had 6 so far. So now we're seeing a trend up, a disturbing trend, similar to the early days of fentanyl. And the hope is that as we address the fentanyl epidemic, it'll have a corresponding effect on the xylazine, the rise in xylazine, and hopefully address that as well. I wanted to share with you some case studies. I get data and work with the medical examiner, our county's medical examiner, regularly. And he shares with me data about what's happening in our communities, and I've broken it down for the xylazine cases. There were 3 of the 6 that have happened this year so far that I only learned about this weekend, and I didn't have time to introduce their case studies here for you. So I have the 2 from 2022 that happened in November and December, and then the first 3 from this year. But as you can see from case study number 1, we have a 40-year-old white female. She was living in a tent on a sidewalk in the East Village neighborhood of downtown San Diego. Her postmortem toxicology, she had parafluorofentanyl. That's an analog of fentanyl. There are thousands of analogs of fentanyl, and they have varying degrees of potency, some less potent than fentanyl itself and some more potent. Parafluorofentanyl happens to be one of the ones that's more potent than fentanyl itself. And there's an interesting trend that we saw when we looked at these xylazine cases. But case number 1, parafluorofentanyl, cocaine, and xylazine. Case number 2 was a 62-year-old white male, formerly unhoused, but then put into housing via the IMPACT program. He was found on his couch in that apartment, also parafluorofentanyl, this time with methamphetamine and xylazine. Case number 3 happened in January of this year. It was a 55-year-old Hispanic male living in Lakeside. He was found in his bathroom on the floor in the home that he rented. Parafluorofentanyl again. This is the trend, right? And it's an interesting trend because seeing these, you would think parafluorofentanyl is much more common than this would suggest. It's not. But there's some connection here that we don't know. We can't really explain why that is, but it's being found with such frequency when it's mixed with xylazine. This one has parafluorofentanyl, fentanyl, methamphetamine, and xylazine. The next case study was in March of this year. It was a 23-year-old. He was a black male living in San Carlos neighborhood of San Diego. He was found on the floor of his bedroom. Parafluorofentanyl, fentanyl, methamphetamine, xylazine, and delta-9 THC, what you're going to get by consuming marijuana. The last case study that I'm going to share with you came from May of this year. It was a 72-year-old Hispanic male living, he was at home, but in a shed, found in a shed in the backyard of his home. He had fentanyl, chlordiazepoxide, xylazine, and again, delta-9 THC. So then I just summarized on the right side of your screen, took an average, so the average age of 50, but what a wide range, right? From a 23-year-old male to someone in their 70s is dying from this. We had 4 males and 1 female. That's pretty common on our fentanyl overdoses. It's usually 4 to 1, right around there, males to female. Minimum of 3 drugs detected in these samples. Also, unfortunately, very common among the overdose deaths that we're seeing. It's polysubstance use is what's killing our community members. And it's right now we're in the age of fentanyl plus stimulants. It's methamphetamine primarily mixed with fentanyl that's killing the members of our community. And this is the unusual trend, that parafluorofentanyl, which is troubling because it's so much stronger than fentanyl itself, being detected in 4 out of the 5 deaths I shared with you. So, as of today, there is no pending legislation in California. And as you could see from that map that I shared with you, all the pending legislation was in the Northeast and then some in the South. And that kind of makes sense because they have been decimated by xylazine and fentanyl. And I suspect as that drug, if it in fact continues to make its way westward, that we'll see more states passing more regulations, more laws to address the threat of xylazine. And although California has not passed and has no pending legislation, our Attorney General has in fact signed a letter. There were a number of Attorney Generals from different states who penned a letter to the Congress in saying, we're standing behind and want you to pass the Combating Illicit Xylazine Act. So California has at least made it known that we're concerned about it, and we back legislation that will outlaw it and address it federally. That's my presentation for you this afternoon. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Just go down the line. Questions? Go ahead, Steve.
So with xylazine or fentanyl or any of these other addictive drug epidemics, what has been shown to actually work to interrupt? And when you, like a couple of sub-questions, when you talk about legislation, is there a reason that state versus federal legislation is a more effective route in terms of criminalization? Does criminalizing use versus distribution versus manufacturing provide different effects? And is a law enforcement approach versus like a pharmaceutical approach where you develop reversal or withdraw medications the most helpful thing?
Yeah, all great questions and quite a lengthy, in-depth discussion, but let me do my best to try and answer it. And I may miss part of it, so just remind me if I do. But one thing that District Attorney Summer Steffen has recognized early on is that prosecution alone is never going to be enough to combat fentanyl, xylazine, any other drug that's affecting our community. But the same can be true for every other approach. Treatment alone will never be enough. If there's a drug, and I'll stick to xylazine since that's what we're talking about, if xylazine floods our market and is available readily without interruption on our streets, the chances of getting anyone successfully into treatment goes down significantly. It just makes it too easy to use. The draw for the addiction is too strong, the dependence is too strong, the need to satisfy that too easy when the drug is so incredibly cheap. Xylazine itself, you can get a kilo of xylazine for between $6 and $10. So now imagine that, you mix it with fentanyl, which itself is incredibly cheap. In Mexicali, not just across the border in Mexico, in bulk, it's going for 5 cents per counterfeit pill for fentanyl. And so now on the streets here in San Diego, once it crosses the border, it gets a little more expensive. But for the cost of a cup of coffee, you can get a fentanyl counterfeit pill containing fentanyl. So there has to be all aspects of this to address it. Harm reduction alone. We can save lives by getting reversal medications out in the community, and we should. We absolutely need them. The longer we can keep people alive, the better chances we have to get them into treatment and to break them from this cycle. But what are the chances of doing that when the streets continue to get flooded with the drug? And so we need harm reduction, working together with prevention, get up front. Further upstream is what we like to say. And upstream means let's attack it at the source. Let's attack it by the supply. If we can shut down the shipment of precursor chemicals coming in from China, India, to a lesser extent some other countries, either directly into our country or into Mexico, if we can shut down the supply from crossing the Mexican border north to us, and we can shut down the trafficking that's occurring on our streets and online, that's a big part of it. It's not enough. We need to get education and education of our community, and we need to start young. And we need to tailor that education based on the age of the recipient, who's learning from this stuff. And that's another thing that summer staff is incredibly excited about. She's put me in charge of a working group, and we are identifying evidence-based curriculum, drug prevention curriculum for implementation into our county schools. And what we found in our research, we've enlisted the help of prevention scientists, curriculum analysts, and what we find is that, especially with the young kids, that's where we need to start. It's not about teaching them about fentanyl or xylazine. It's about these skills like resiliency, emotional self-regulation, confidence, communication, refusal skills. These skills are skills that just translate into less drug use and consequently less overdoses. It's not going to solve everything, but we need to do that. We need to start really early. So it's education, working together, it's prevention, public safety, supply reduction, then prevention, treatment, and harm reduction, all working together. Just last week, I was in New York City. The mayor of New York invited contingencies from all over the country, and I was lucky enough to go on DA Steffen's behalf and attend a 2-day summit. And they had people from all over the country that would come in and they would talk, and they would from different sectors of the community and the approach. And what I found very reassuring and refreshing was people that are in the treatment sector saying we need more public safety involvement. We need to partner more because they recognize and we recognize, public safety recognizes we can't do it alone. And treatment sounds like they realize that as well. So, and I may have left out, I know you had a... Yes. I think it may. It may make a difference. One, states can always decide they want to address it in a harsher fashion than the federal government. They may decide that that's what they want to do, but beyond that, the states tend to move faster than the federal government. The other thing is the resources that are available. And while the federal government has a lot of resources, even if we look locally, you have the U.S. attorneys who prosecute federal crimes. And they might not have the number of attorneys. Like I have a team of 14 that can focus just on this. And for that type of these overdose death cases, they don't have that number. They're addressing a lot of things, as are we. But so there may be that, a resource question, whether state prosecutors are better equipped. And there's always going to be differences in the law and what a state decides, how they want to approach it, and what the federal government will decide what they think is the best approach. You're welcome. Thanks.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. I learned a lot. I'm just curious as why Philadelphia? Do we know, what can San Diego County or state of California learn about what happened there to address this
It's a
crisis?
fantastic question, and I wish I had the answer. And it's odd because xylazine really started its illicit use in Puerto Rico, and it started in the early 2000s. And then we don't hear much about that, and the next thing you know, it's big in Philadelphia, in the Northeast. I'm looking into that. I hope next time we talk, I'll have an answer for you. Right now, I don't know why that Philadelphia in particular and that community in particular is being hit incredibly hard with xylazine.
It's got to be a source. There's just got to be a source of supply going into that.
Yeah, an established market, established route. It's probably that, and
Well, it looks like that was a lot of people experiencing homelessness. It looked like East Village.
Absolutely.
yeah, and I didn't say that, but I certainly saw it. I was on a ride along with our neighborhood policing division. We went through the East Village, and it reminded me of this video that I showed. So we're not that far from that. We just don't have xylazine there on board, but we certainly have fentanyl, and it's concerning.
Question? No? Go ahead.
First of all, I'm here as the citizen at large, but I am a certified addiction drug counselor in the state of California. I think it's important, a couple things that are important to note. First of all, there's no testing for xylazine when clients come into treatment. There's no test. They test for fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, that. there's no way to know if any of our clients are coming into the facility with xylazine in their system. So the numbers that you're showing here are those that are post-mortem. That's not the actual number of people who are using. So also, when you say people died and they had all these drugs in their system, the reality may be that they thought they were buying methamphetamine, only to find out that it had fentanyl in it. I can't tell you the number of my clients who come in, tested for drugs, and are told they had fentanyl in their system and had no idea that they were using it. I do agree with you that there needs to be a stronger partnership between treatment, substance use treatment, and law enforcement. The reality is at this point, if someone falls out of our treatment program, what happens is they come back, and they come back, or they're shipped over here, or they're shipped over there, or they go to this program, and they go to this program, and they go to this program, until we finally get a notice that says, by the way, your client died. So there's no consequence to their using. It's just this whack-a-mole policy of telling people, well, you failed out of treatment, so we're going to put you in another one and put you in another one. Years ago, the Little Hoover Commission did a study about substance use treatment in the state of California and addiction, and one of the things that they said was that there's the strong concept of boiling a frog, which means that if we put a frog in a pot of hot boiling water, the frog will jump out right away. But if we put the frog in the pot of water and turn the heat on, it will sit there until it boils itself to death. And for those of us that are working in substance abuse treatment, we see that, where our clients are coming in boiled. This is a problem I could have solved 10 years ago. If we attack the problem at the onset, there's a greater likelihood of a positive outcome. But if we wait until someone is boiled, what do you want us to do about that? So I'm a believer in harm reduction, but I'm also a believer that the people that recover from addiction do so because it's harder to use than to be clean. So I'm just, my hair was blonde this morning. I really want to solve this problem, but I can't continue to Narcan my clients, knowing that it's not going to work if they have xylazine in their system. Those people that you showed on that video, that's someone's child. That person sat next to you in church. That person went to the same restaurant you did. That person prays to your God. And we allow this to happen over and over again, saying this is harm reduction. It didn't reduce any harm. So I would love to partner with you in trying to get people access to care and then holding them accountable. I think that the people that are producing these chemicals, I think that if I looked at wanting to take over or ruin another country, I would need a nuclear bomb. I think that this is the answer to that. And when we look at what's happening in our streets, I think it's horrific. And so if there's anything that I can do to partner with you to try to get people into care but also held accountable, I'm more than willing to do that. I'm just a citizen here today. I don't speak on behalf of my employer.
Well, thank you for those comments, and we welcome that partnership. The more partners we have and the more partners that have specific knowledge like you have, the better that we'll be able to do it. And I agree with you. There's so many sentencing hearings that I've been to where we have prosecuted traffickers. We've prosecuted people that they have maybe a substance use issue themselves, but they're dealing poison and they know they're dealing it and they know the consequences of that. And I can't tell you how often I hear, thank you. I want to thank the police for arresting me, and I want to thank the prosecutor for prosecuting me, and I want to thank you for sending me to prison because I was going to die and because there's consequences. And you're right. As long as there are no consequences, it's easier to use. And it's unfortunate. And it's too often that we are seeing people that are being saved by naloxone, that otherwise fatal ingestion of fentanyl, just to go out and use again. It happens all the time. And so something different needs to happen.
And just so we're clear, people don't choose to be drug addicts. When you ask a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up, they don't say, well, I'd like to be a drug addict. So the people that come to my program, they all, across the board, have a history of trauma. Mm-hmm. The number one history of trauma for women, 90%, is sexual abuse. So they did a study years ago at CIW, and they asked the women that were there that were sentenced on a drug conviction, how many of them had a history of substance abuse. It was almost 90%. Interestingly enough, 2% of that population was there for sex offenses, for prostitution and said no, that they had no history of sexual trauma, believing that because they were paid, what was done to them was legal. So I think when you talk about resiliency and we talk about our youth and our family, boy, if you don't think that's a starting place, you're absolutely right. We've got to do something to make sure that our children are safe and that they don't grow up saying, when I grow up, I want to be a drug addict. We've got to stop this early on. So help there, good on that too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that segue. That leads right into a question that I had. First of all, thank you very much for this presentation. And I also appreciate your rather comprehensive response to Steve's question earlier. My question is a little more detailed and it has to do with education. You mentioned that there is an effort right now underway to develop curriculum. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that going to be offered free of charge to school districts?
There will be a range, and at least the way it's not finalized yet. And so the working group that I'm a part of, we've identified a number of different curricula that could be implemented by our county schools. We're including in what's going to be a brief that will ultimately be disseminated, the options, and that some will be free, some will have charges. And so it'll be up to the independent school districts where the budget can come from, where that money can come from, whether they can afford it, and how much they're willing to spend for this type of education, depending on the different curricula. And the different curricula have different ratings that have been analyzed by different registries. Blueprints is one that's well known, but there are a number, like 5 different registries that will examine school curricula depending on different grades, and they'll have randomized controlled trials over a number of years as to what has been effective in terms of keeping kids from using drugs. And so we've done that analysis, and we've compiled a number of curricula. Schools might do differently. There are 42 independent districts in the county. So that's the next step, is where do we get the funds? And can we use opioid settlement funds? Can we get additional help from different sources? And so we're going to look into that as well and assist in any way we can there.
That was a follow-up question that I had. Had there been any investigation as to whether this curriculum and hopefully a supporting professional development that would accompany it would be eligible for the use of LCAP funds or funds that are available to school districts? Yeah,
and then, like I said, that's the next step in the analysis. The first step is where we're at. Unfortunately, it's not moving as fast enough, right? We want everything now, but we've done a painstaking review of both the literature and the programs that are available, and that's the first step, which is just about complete. Next step is where do we get those funds?
I would encourage you to remember to include professional development too.
Okay.
Opportunities.
And in terms of professional development, if you mean like training the actual trainers.
With the staff on how to properly use and share the information.
We're absolutely looking into that. And fortunately, as part of this working group, we have members of the California National Guard, and they have already committed to becoming trainers, learning. And so to the extent the school districts opt for that, they'll have training of their educators by the Guard who will get training directly from the curriculum developers. So that has been considered, and we're going down that road.
Good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Wow. This takes me back for decades, but pretty much the same story being regurgitated. It's just changed the drug name, and we're playing catch up so many times as a society. A couple things resonated with me is, one, starting with the video, I was noticing the gait of many of the people in the video, the posture.
Yes.
And then as you showed the tissue destruction and that sort of thing, it was just an observation that I made, that I was making. I've worked with a lot of people under the influence, et cetera, in a lot of scenarios. And there's something that just jumped out at me when that camera was just moving through the crowd, that there's something present there, and whether it's a symptom or an objective symptom, something like that, I don't know. But then, as you were given the local stats here on the deaths, a small sample for sure, luckily, but that age just flew out at me, and the location. That those locations were spread out around the county, not clustered where the homeless people necessarily are hanging out there, dying in the bathroom floor or whatever, some of the stories you were telling. And, so far, just coming down the road, we've already tapped on several things, and you named prevention. Certainly, we got harm reduction, we got treatment, we got arresting, we got legislating, we got all this stuff coming in from the top. But for me, so much of my previous career and careers has been around prevention, which is one of the hardest things. It's so hard to measure. And what is really jumping out is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which is a landmark study that is now a major component out of the Centers for Disease Control, talking about when bad things happen to us as kids, it affects our health throughout life to that we check out earlier. And the population you're naming would fall into that category of 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 60-something-year-olds, and certainly the 23-year-old fits in that trajectory. So I'm curious if that age demographic that you're seeing here is kind of paralleling what the nation's seeing on the ODs, and then opening the door for future research around the country, even as to what is it. You got the drug, of course it's coming on board. You take one drug away, somebody's waiting out there to bring in another one. That's the nature of the business of that. But it's more of what's going on in the individuals nationwide, that they're feeling this need to somehow self-soothe. So the education component, to have you name compassion here, just resonates with me well. It's like, yeah, you got all the right words here. It's like, how do you build programs, whether it's in the schools or wherever, to teach kids to self-regulate? Well, one of the ways we self-regulate, pick up a cigarette and smoke it. Find some marijuana. Grab a beer out of the refrigerator. Mom and Dad will never miss it. And there's a lot of ways that we can regulate. So if we teach it in schools and hopefully ultimately into the homes, that kind of prevention is very difficult, costly, hard to measure, hard to implement. So probably right now I'm just editorializing rather than a real question, other than are the deaths mirroring the country, or is it this just kind of like this is San Diego County and this is all we got right now?
Well, like you said, at least in terms of xylazine, it's such a small sample that it's hard to generalize it and compare it nationwide, because the average age being 50 with the xylazine deaths that we've seen is on the high side. The vast majority, if we look at fentanyl, the vast majority are falling between 25 and 35 years of age. The youngest last year was 15 years old. The year before that was 13. I think it's only happenstance that it hasn't been younger. We've had a number of cases where toddlers, infants, have consumed fentanyl, and thank God they were saved. The naloxone was distributed, they were found in time, and their overdose was reversed, and they didn't lose their life. But other parts of the country, when I was in New York, they were just talking about the 1-year-old. You may have heard that case. The 1-year-old at a daycare center, and 3 died, consumed fentanyl and died, and 3 others in that preschool daycare also overdosed but were saved by naloxone. I think that's, unfortunately, and I don't want to maybe put that prediction out there, but I'm amazed that the youngest so far has been 13 in our county. And but in terms of our fentanyl deaths, the 25 to 35 being the bulk of it, that's in line with what we're seeing across the country. But it goes higher. The highest I've seen is 88 years of age, and there are a number of people in their 70s and 80s dying from fentanyl. I did a presentation recently at the senior center, George L. Stevens Senior Center down the Skyline neighborhood of San Diego. And I looked at the stats and what do they look like for people over the 55 and older. And last year, 55 years and older, we lost 153 people to a fentanyl overdose. If we go back in time, we look at just 2019, not that long ago. 2019, we had 151 people in the entire county for the entire year lose their lives to fentanyl. And so now last year, we had 153. Those are people just 55 and older. And then you add on all the other people that died, and that's brought us up to 814. So I hope that answers the question, and I appreciate your comments.
It does, and there's one other comment, because this brings up other reminiscing. On the domestic violence side of the house, back when I was working in that environment, there used to be a thing within the county. I don't know if it still exists. a process where experts would come across discipline-wide after a domestic violence-related death occurred. They would do a psychological autopsy. It's a very specific forensic study. And I'm looking at this through that kind of a lens, that taking a death from overdose of any drug, but specifically fentanyl and xylazine and whatever else is waiting out down the pike to come this way, of doing that psychological autopsy for the purposes of prevention, which they're expensive, they're costly, they're complex, but it starts getting a peek into that person's life as a human, that we got a human here that died from something, and what was going on when. What was going on a week ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And the older they are, we have a longer look to start pulling through that thread of trauma and adverse childhood experiences, et cetera, to say, that's a bright line that we might be able to do something with early on, that we can measure 20 years down the road, which is hard for most of us to hang. Most of us, we do our careers, we retire, we move on. But that concept of a psychological autopsy just is jumping up at me.
And you're in good company. We are actually in the planning stages of a fatality review committee, exactly what you're talking about. And we're taking it modeled exactly after what you're talking about in terms of the domestic violence, and it's in some other areas of the law. And what we're currently looking for legislation that will allow us to protect the confidentiality within those meetings, because we're going to have law enforcement involved, we're going to have my office involved, and there may be ongoing investigations or things that we need to be able to share freely, information that would otherwise be confidential. And so we want legislation that's going to just back us and protect us, allow us to share that information. But exactly what you're saying, I think, is critical. All along the steps, from grade school till the death, where was there room that we could have stepped in? What could we have done differently? Was there room for intervention in elementary school? Could a school counselor have intervened when this action took place in high school? When they first were introduced to the criminal justice system, if instead of going this way, we went that way, could we have done something different? But a complete analysis of that life and what we can learn from it and what we can do better moving forward. I think it's a brilliant idea, and I'm looking forward to being a part of it. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I had the great fortune to work with James probably for over 20 years, and the majority of the cases I worked all went to your office, and your office had the reputation, and it still does today when I talk to the people that are still on the job, of being forward-looking and thinking outside the box to defeat certain whatever the issue was, and it looks like you're doing that still today, and I'm glad I got to see you again. And
Yeah.
Congratulations on being the chief. That's a big job, and that office is they do some amazing work there.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, and it's good seeing you again, too.
Jacob or Lieutenant or Captain? Nope. Well, I work in prevention. It's what I get paid for my day job, and it often feels like I'm, trying to stop the tsunami with a beach bucket of water. But we know that it's a spectrum. We know that prevention, treatment, is all a spectrum that's really important. But we forget about prevention a lot. We in San Diego County receives funding from the federal government through SAMHSA, which then goes to the state, which then comes to the county to do prevention activities and prevention work. That is then distributed to different nonprofits to do that work in San Diego County and the various regions. In East Region, an area pretty large, we have 3 people that are able to be funded for that. Myself, prevention specialist, a part-time media specialist, and a part-time community youth organizer. And we work with community members, and we work to try to engage the community, but the community is busy. The community is, got their lives. So I sometimes feel, and I'm probably going to get in trouble saying this, but that there's the idea of what should be invested in prevention is not as flashy as is what should be invested in treatment. And there's always that, they're both important, they're both valuable. So I'm really excited about the work that the district attorney is doing. I'm excited to see what other leaders in the county are doing. And there's a lot of good that's happening out there. And we often think about prevention as keeping folks from, having access to the substance, but we should also think about the environmental, social, and cultural conditions that exist that cause them to want to use substances, that create a sense of lack of community, lack of connection, depression. Obviously, I could probably say there's maybe some correlation between supply and demand and COVID, and coming out of COVID. I am curious about that 2019 blip that happened and kind of the connection to. I wonder if that individual may have traveled to Philadelphia or somewhere else in their travels. So I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. Thank you to the committee for all your awesome questions. And if folks want to get a hold of you, I'm sure we can make that happen. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all, and I am available if you have additional questions or want to reach out. I'm always happy to help out any way I can. Thank you.
Take care. All right. I feel like I need to take a collective deep breath on that. All right, let's move to our diversity, equity, inclusion. I know we have a meeting this afternoon of the ad hoc committee, or a committee.
And anybody interested in being involved in an upcoming event or giving their opinion and feedback regarding that, we'll have a meeting following this meeting. It won't be televised or recorded, but you're welcome to stay and participate in that meeting so that we can start some additional planning on that upcoming event. And then also, DEI related, we did host our first movie in the park, Coco, with also some activities to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. And it was very well attended and got some kudos about bringing those elements to Santee. So that was a good event.
Awesome. It's a good movie, too. Do you want to say anything? Nope. All right. And for those who are wondering, so the meeting is to talk about an event that's an extension of the work, the DEI work, to bring those our community values into physical existence. To manifest them. Thank you. All right. We'll go to item number 6, communication from committee and staff. Are there any announcements that any committee members would like to make? No? Anything
I
from
always
staff?
got stuff to say.
Go ahead.
You know that, right?
Yep.
Okay. Upcoming events. City has our upcoming Brews and Bites Festival coming up on October 21st. We still have tickets available, our regular tickets, as well as designated driver tickets. So if you're interested, santeespecialevents.com. We also have a blood drive coming up October 30th and spooky selfies on October 31st here. The Santee Fire Department is hosting their annual pancake breakfast fundraiser on November 11th. And then mark your calendars, we are lighting a big tree on November 17th at Trolley Square. And the next day, we're actually having a new element called Selfies with Santa. So if you don't want to wait in a big line on the 17th when we light the tree, you can come by on the 18th from 4:30 to 7:30, take a selfie with Santa, a little bit more time and less stimulation if maybe you have somebody who doesn't want all that crowd around them. So that's happening in the next couple of months.
I will always say that my selfies are scary all the time, so or spooky. The beer, the brews, and are there non-alcoholic or options?
Yes, we
there?
have DD tickets as well.
Okay.
Yes, but it is a 21 and over event.
Okay. All right. So any communication from the public? Nope. I don't think so. There's no one here. It is Halloween, so there may be ghosts. But hearing none, we'll move on to our next meeting will be on November 13th, 2023, to discuss United Against Hate Week and the work of the San Diego Anti-Hate Crime Coalition, our Anti-Hate Coalition. Our reminder, our December 11th meeting is canceled. So we will see you all next month in November, and without any objection, I will adjourn the meeting.